Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So today we're doing series The Unported Playlist, where I take those of my favorite unported arcade games of all time. And today we're doing a revisit on a video I did over 3 years ago, because we're going to be playing the beta test version of Primal Rage 2, a game that never actually saw release in arcades or anywhere else. And this is all because as of the recent main.275 update, running Primal Rage 2 with absolutely no issues whatsoever. It's absolutely amazing, and it means a lot more people are going to be able to play Primal Rage 2 today. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we have a Patreon link down below as well. But Primal Rage, the original game, was an absolute hit, and even if it's not my favorite fighting game around, it 100% made an impact on the fighting game community out there, and it is still a game that everyone really does love to play, and that's just down to how different it truly was. Now, Primal Rage 2 completely pivots things up. In the original game, you were a dinosaur, and now you are a human that can activate a dinosaur mode. You'll see there at the bottom of the screen, when that bar is flashing red and filled up, you can morph into a dinosaur for a special attack, and that's definitely a complete 180 from the original game, but I think it kind of works ever so slightly. It's one of those things, I understand it is a big change from the original game, but it is still interesting. And one of the things I love about Primal Rage as a series, and Primal Rage 2 specifically, is just how they animate the characters. They're so fluid and so unique. They look completely different than pretty much anything else that was on the market before. You combine that with the backgrounds, with all of the worshippers in the back cheering you on and even bowing down and praying during the fights. It absolutely is 100% a vibe. But obviously Primal Rage 2 didn't make it to arcade floors. There was something that the developers just did not feel was working right, and they ended up canceling the game, and that's not really that surprising. Arcade games and regular console games get canceled all the time, but considering how popular Primal Rage was, it really is surprising that they didn't try to bear down and fix some of the issues they felt were in Primal Rage 2 and end up releasing something, because I know a lot of people out there were anticipating the game back in the day. There were previews for it, so for it to basically just get canceled and never be seen again was a bummer. But of course, via emulation and video game preservation, it is a title you can play in MAME, and that is absolutely awesome. This is a test version of the game, and basically back in the day and even now, arcade operators would send out location test cabinets of games that weren't quite finished, basically to see how they did on the floor and to gather player feedback. I have a few test location boards in my collection, and sometimes if the feedback came back too negative or the operators didn't feel like it was a game they wanted to buy, that would be a big indicator that the game should be canceled. So this test version of the game, more likely than not, was on floors somewhere in the US, and considering a lot of these things actually ended up getting distributed out of the Midwest, I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere in the Chicagoland area you saw a Primal Rage 2 cabinet. And the fun part is there is still one cabinet today, one of the test versions, and it is Galloping Ghost, which is just about 40 minutes from where I'm sitting right now. But as far as the actual gameplay is concerned here in the test version, the nice thing is it is pretty much complete. The moveset is there are combos, you can morph into the dinosaurs, all the graphics work. It feels like maybe it's like 75 to 80% complete. Now there either isn't a test menu, or I cannot figure out how to get into it, because every time I enter the test menu, it automatically boots me out like it's not there. So you're going to get one difficulty, and it's not going to be adjustable. There's no dip switches outside of a service mode, which basically just checks monitor calibration. So you're going to have to get good at this game quickly if you want to get to the later stages, because there really isn't any way to articulate any of that difficulty. But I just love the look of the game, that slight parallax scrolling in the backgrounds, the pre-rendered visuals, this claymation style of animation on these sprites. It just 100% combines together to be a really appealing look. And again, it's definitely not going to compete with the King of Fighters or Street Fighters out there for complexity in a fighting game, but it still 100% works. Although I would say maybe Killer Instinct did it a little bit better, but you tell me down below. Primal Rage or Killer Instinct, I would be curious to hear what you guys like better. And the best part is, again, with this being so close to complete, it does have a full soundtrack, so go ahead and listen for 45 seconds, catch the vibes, and I'll be right back.
Kaze versus Marek.
Maybe not the best soundtrack in a fighting game, but the fact that it has one in the first place is a good thing, because a lot of prototype games, whether they're arcade or home console games that didn't actually see release, sometimes you just don't get any music in it whatsoever because it wasn't actually finished yet. And that's why Primal Rage 2 definitely feels like it was a close to the finish line game. You have a full roster of characters, you have unique backgrounds, you have the moveset in there, you have the music as well. Definitely needed some balancing, wasn't quite ready for prime time as far as the overall CPU AI is concerned, or even the balancing on some of the combos, but it shows that they were relatively close. And again, I am surprised that they canceled this one. I'm not saying it is an amazing game, it is just decent, but it feels good enough to make release, especially because there was definitely fighting games on the arcade market at this point in time that were far worse than something like Primal Rage 2 was. And I've never heard a real definitive reason as to why the game was canceled other than the fact that they just didn't feel they had confidence in it, but I've never really understood that. If you're a huge fighting game fan or a member of the fighting game community, you tell me on the gameplay front if this thing is just absolute garbage in your eyes, because I am a casual fighting game fan. Maybe the only game I'm actually relatively decent at would be BlazBlue, but I just play these because I love them, and I love that background there. You basically have Primal Rage, Mount Rushmore, you have all of the presidents, and then that ape at the end as well. There's a ton of creativity in the game, there's a ton of fun characters, great backgrounds, and it really does entertain you. And again, before this, you had to use a very specific version of MAME for Rage, and that would still end up with freezing and crashing issues. Last time I tried to play it, it took me about 15 minutes just to get through a couple rounds because I did have a couple different crashes. Now on MAME 0.275, you're going to be able to play the game from start to finish with no issues whatsoever, and it definitely is worth playing even if it isn't done. I love going through arcade retro gaming history and video game history in general, talking about not only the great games that were released, but the games that never actually saw release, because there's so many arcade games out there that went to location tests that we know about that never saw actual release, and you basically can't play them today. I'd say out of every 10 cabinets that didn't actually get released to arcades, 9 out of the 10 of those games are just completely lost. So Primal Rage 2 existing in this test version definitely is the exception, not the rule, and we should all be so happy that that is the case, because so many of these things get lost. If you go through Japanese arcade magazines from back in the 90s, there's so many different previews of games that you've just never seen or heard of before because they came and went. Something like Skier's High from Konami, a game I've been searching for over 5 years. There was 4 cabinets made, it was location tested, and then it was never seen again. So this could have turned out the same way as that on the Primal Rage 2 front, where you knew it happened, but you never got a chance to play it. And that's why, again, I'm always advocating for emulation and video game preservation on the channel, because it means every single person out there can experience Primal Rage 2, and it definitely is worth experiencing. It's one of those games I just always have fun with it, no matter what I'm doing, even again if it's not perfect. But one more soundtrack sample, 35 seconds, and I'll be back and close out the video on Primal Rage 2. Now that track right there, I would say, is better than decent. I actually really like it. It has a kind of a horror aesthetic going on, and with all of the transformations between the human characters and the animals, it is smoothly animated, and it does have a really nice appearance. This definitely wouldn't go toe-to-toe with the best of what Sega or Namco were putting out graphical-wise when this game was supposed to be on markets, but that's totally fine. Not everything needs to be the absolute cutting edge or bleeding edge of graphical technology in the arcades. So it really is a bummer that this game did get canceled. I could see it getting a port to Nintendo 64, maybe even Dreamcast as a launch game, but the only thing we're left with is this test version, and that is in and of itself absolutely amazing, because it means that every single person out there can play Primal Rage 2, and I think absolutely all of you should. And now, like I said, considering it works in the newest recent release of MAME, it's going to be that much easier to play. You might have a little bit of an issue finding the files. It can be tricky. I had to go through 3 or 4 different sets till I was able to get it to launch, but trust me, it is worth the time, and if you ever need help help with that, you can pop over to my Patreon. But Primal Rage 2, I talked about it 3.5 years ago, and back then I basically said getting it set up was so difficult you might not want to bother. Now today it'll take you all of about 60 seconds once you find the right files to jump into a canceled arcade game and just start playing it. But short of that, leave me a comment down below and tell me what's the other canceled arcade game you'd love to see get released. But we're done and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.